Chapter 14, The Siege of Novus. The Novus nightclub was a vibrating, neon-soaked monument to untouchable wealth. It was 1:30 a.m. on a Friday, and the three-tiered Ultra Club in Bonifacio Global City was operating at peak capacity. Over 2,000 of Manila's elite politicians, heirs to shipping fortunes, celebrities, and highly paid influencers were packed onto the LED-lit dance floors. The heavy, rhythmic thumping of European techno rattled the crystal glasses in the VIP sections, drowning out the sirens wailing 3 blocks away. Marco Dizon stood on the reinforced glass balcony of the Apex VIP suite, looking down at his kingdom. He was dressed flawlessly in a bespoke midnight blue suit, holding a tumbler of 30-year-old single malt scotch. Mateo Reyes stood a few paces behind him, near the private elevator. Mateo wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing dark tactical pants and a heavy windbreaker that expertly concealed the compact, suppressed submachine gun strapped tightly to his chest. "Look at them, Teo," Marco said, taking a slow sip of his scotch, his eyes gleaming with euphoric arrogance as the strobe lights washed over the crowd below. 3 months ago, these people wouldn't have let us clean their pools. Tonight, they are begging my bouncers to let them spend $500,000 on watered-down champagne just to breathe my air. The president can issue all the decrees he wants. The republic needs this money. Mateo didn't look at the crowd. He was looking at the small, encrypted earpiece resting in the palm of his hand. It had been dead silent for 5 minutes. Paolo and Rico missed their rotational check-in at the front doors, Mateo said, his voice flat, cutting through the heavy bass of the club. Marco barely turned his head, waving a dismissive hand. They are probably doing cocaine with some C-list actresses in the coat check. Relax. It's a Friday. Let the boys have some fun. Paolo is a hardened Askel's lieutenant who survived 3 gang wars in Tonda, Mateo countered, his jaw tightening. He doesn't miss radio checks for coke. Before Marco could argue, the encrypted earpiece loudly clicked in Mateo's ear. It wasn't Paolo. It was June, and he was out of breath. "Teo, listen to me," June's voice cracked. "The safe houses. Caloocan, Quezon City, and Pasay. They're all gone. NBI tactical teams raided them simultaneously 20 minutes ago. They completely emptied the central vaults." Marco froze, overhearing the audio bleed. "All 3. That's strictly impossible. Only 5 men alive know all 3 stash addresses. For now," June rasped. "Tomas is gone, boss. He didn't report for the shift. A dock worker saw him boarding a ferry heading south to Cebu an hour ago. He had his little brother Leo with him, carrying a single duffel bag. Navarro broke him, Teo. He traded the empire to keep his brother out of prison." Mateo felt the air leave his lungs. The revelation hit him infinitely harder than a bullet ever could. Tomas, the brick-like enforcer who had bled for him at the Vanguard raid, the boy who had starved beside him in the Tonda dumps, had finally snapped under the suffocating paranoia of Mateo's ruthless reign. A sick, metallic taste of guilt flooded Mateo's mouth as memories of Tonda poverty flashed behind his eyes. He realized with a hollow dread that he was using these street kids the exact same way the system had used him. He was terrified he was turning into Marco, ruling through fear and disposable lives rather than the brotherhood they once shared. The loyalty Mateo thought he could simply command with cash had ultimately shattered in the face of true family. Mateo's empire was crumbling from the terrified inside. Before Mateo could even process the devastating weight of the betrayal, heavy static violently hissed in his ear as June yelled again. "Teo, they cut the power to the outer block. Heavy armor. They're breaching the..." A metallic crunch shook the foundation of the building as a heavy tactical battering ram smashed through the magnetic locks. The heavy, reinforced glass doors at the main entrance of the club were shoved forcefully open. The techno music was instantly overridden by a deafening, high-pitched screech from a long-range acoustic device, LRAD, positioned outside, plunging the 3-story nightclub into a painful, disorienting shock. The crowd of 2,000 elites paused in a collective, confused hush as they clamped their hands over their ears. Then, the tactical strobe lights cut through the lobby. NBI. Nobody move. Get down on the damn floor. Special Agent Daniel Navarro stormed through the open entrance, clutching a heavy assault rifle. Behind him, 40 heavily armored tactical operators flooded into the luxury lobby. They moved with practiced military precision, fans spreading across the dance floor, their green laser sights sweeping over the terrified crowd. Absolute pandemonium triggered. The silence shattered into thousands of shrieking voices. Celebrities and politicians screamed in pure terror, stampeding wildly toward the fire exits. Women in 10,000 peso heels tripped and were trampled as the elite recognized their wealth no longer protected them. Navarro tossed a non-lethal flashbang into the center of the room. The blinding white flash instantly dropped the closest patrons to their knees in shock. I said on the floor. Anyone running will be treated as a combatant. Navarro roared, his voice projecting through a heavy megaphone strapped to his vest. Up on the VIP balcony, Marco Dizon froze. His crystal tumbler slipped from his manicured fingers, shattering against the glass floor. He stared down at the sea of armed federal agents dismantling his invincible fortress in real time. This is impossible, Marco whispered, his voice trembling slightly, his eyes wide with shock. I paid General Santiago. I paid him 50 million pesos. I told you the storm didn't take bribes, Marco, Mateo said grimly, drawing his suppressed submachine gun from beneath his jacket. 3 of Marco's highly paid private security guards rushed out onto the balcony, drawing heavy pistols. Boss, we need to get you to the roof, the lead guard barked, ignoring Mateo. The helipad. No. Marco snapped, aggressively straightening his bespoke jacket, an insane flash of indignation crossing his face. The initial shock had mutated back into desperate, rabid hubris. No. I am not running out the back door of my own property like a common street rat. I built this city. They answer to me. Marco shoved the guard aside and marched to the edge of the glass balcony, leaning over the railing so the tactical units below could see him. Who is in charge here? Marco yelled down at the chaos, his voice booming over the screaming crowd. Down on the dance floor, Special Agent Navarro lowered his rifle. He tilted his head up, his hardened eyes locking directly onto Marco on the third-floor balcony. Navarro casually raised his megaphone. Marco Dizon. By order of the President of the Republic, you are hereby ordered to surrender immediately. Place your hands on the glass where I can see them, Navarro announced, devoid of emotion. Marco laughed, a sharp, manic sound that echoed terribly in the space. Do you have any idea exactly who I am? Marco screamed down at the veteran agent, gripping the railing until his knuckles turned white. My partners run the Senate. I fund the mayoral campaigns. If you don't take your men and get out of my property this exact second, I will have your badge, your pension, and I will make sure you spend the rest of your pathetic life directing traffic in a province. Beside Marco, the lead security guard mistakenly took Marco's unchecked rage as an order to engage. The guard rapidly drew his heavy pistol, shifting his aim down at the dance floor. He didn't even get his finger on the trigger. Before the guard could level the weapon, Navarro reacted with split-second speed. The veteran agent raised his assault rifle, flipped the selector switch from auto to single fire, and squeezed the trigger. Crack! The heavy rifle round punched through the thick glass of the balcony, striking the security guard directly in the chest. The sheer kinetic impact threw his 300-pound frame backward through the air, sending him crashing heavily into a marble cocktail table. Marco stumbled backward, his pristine blue suit speckled with the violent crimson spray of his own employee. He stared at the dead man on the floor, his brain unable to process the visceral reality of the violence. The police had fired on him. They hadn't cared about the money. They hadn't cared about the Senate. Last warning, Dizon, Navarro's voice boomed mechanically through the megaphone down below. Marco's mouth hung open. The unshakable god complex shattered. Mateo moved instantly, recognizing that his partner was frozen. Mateo grabbed Marco by the scruff of his expensive jacket, hurling him away from the railing and toward the back emergency stairwell. "Move! Now!" Mateo roared. The two remaining guards raised their pistols to fire down at the NBI units, but before they could squeeze the triggers, the agents below opened up with a concentrated barrage of suppressive fire. Hundreds of high-velocity rounds shredded the VIP balcony, obliterating the glass railings, turning expensive leather couches into confetti, and tearing the two guards to pieces. Mateo dragged Marco into the concrete stairwell, slamming the heavy fire door shut just as the wall behind them exploded in a hail of gunfire. The stairwell was predictably loud, echoing with the sound of thousands of boots storming up the steps from the lobby below. They were trapped. The roof. Marco stammered, staring at his guard's blood on his hands. "The helicopter, Teo. We have to go up. They have the airspace locked down. If we go up, we die in a cage." Mateo yelled over the chaos. He gripped Marco by the shoulders and shoved him down the stairs. "We go down. Through the basement loading dock. Move your legs, Marco." They sprinted down the narrow concrete steps, Mateo covering their rear while Marco frantically stumbled ahead. When they reached the second-floor landing, the heavy fire door swung open. 3 heavily armored NBI operators flooded into the stairwell, raising their rifles directly at Marco. "Hold fire. We have the target," the lead operator shouted into his radio. Before the operators could fully acquire their sights, the drywall separating the stairwell from the secondary VIP bathroom exploded. June hadn't stepped out to face them. He had barricaded himself inside the bathroom and simply unleashed a brutal, sweeping burst of automatic shotgun fire blindly through the thin wall. Heavy slugs tore through the drywall, filling the tight confines of the stairwell with blinding, choking white plaster dust and deafening violence. The operators were thrown backward, their heavy ceramic plates absorbing the brunt of the kinetic impact, sending them crashing down the stairs in a tangle of limbs and weapons. Instantly, a second wave of NBI agents below opened fire up the stairwell in response. Hundreds of rounds ripped through the concrete, turning the upper landing into a deadly ricochet trap. June scrambled out of the ruined bathroom, his shoulder bleeding from a grazing ricochet. He grabbed Mateo and pointed down an intersecting service hallway. "The main exit is choked," June yelled over the deafening gunfire. "They have 2 armored transport vehicles blocking the alley. We have to use the old laundromat tunnel." Mateo nodded, grabbing Marco again. "Lead the way." They aggressively pushed past the chaotic firefight, descending rapidly into the humid, subterranean depths of the nightclub structure. The basement was a labyrinth of industrial refrigerators, electrical panels, and heavy concrete pillars. Red emergency lights flashed aggressively, casting deep, terrifying shadows across the narrow corridors. The sound of heavy tactical boots echoing from the floors above confirmed the raid was rapidly closing the net. As they rounded the corner toward the maintenance bay, a blinding spotlight hit them squarely in the face. "Drop the weapons," a deep, gravelly voice commanded over the hum of the basement generators. Mateo immediately dropped behind a steel utility cart, dragging Marco to the cold concrete floor. June dove behind a concrete pillar just as heavy, precise automatic fire chewed through the side of the cart, missing Mateo's head by mere inches. Special Agent Navarro stepped slowly into the underground corridor, flanked by 4 of his elite operators. Navarro moved with relentless calm. He wasn't spraying wildly, he was firing tight, surgical 3-round bursts, methodically pinning them down. "You can't buy your way out of the basement, Dizon," Navarro yelled, closing the distance, his rifle firmly pressed to his shoulder. "Your empire is liquidated." Mateo pressed his back against the cold steel of the cart. He checked the magazine of his submachine gun. He had exactly 12 rounds left. June was pinned behind the pillar, unable to return fire without exposing his torso. Marco was sitting slack-jawed against the wall, his arms wrapped around his knees. He wasn't crying, he was in profound psychological shock. He stared blankly at the ruined, blood-spattered sleeve of his flawless suit, hyperventilating. "My lawyers." Marco muttered in a rapid, detached whisper, rocking slightly. "Call Velasco. Transfer the Cayman accounts, they can't do this. I own the zoning board." The king of Manila had broken from reality. His money couldn't buy his way out of the basement, and his mind simply couldn't process it. Mateo looked from the catatonic Marco to the grim, hardened face of June across the corridor. Mateo grabbed Marco by the lapels and slapped him hard across the face to snap him out of the loop. "The lawyers are dead, Marco. Wake up!" Mateo roared. Mateo had spent his entire life surviving the streets of Tonda by knowing exactly when a fight was unwinnable. If they tried to shoot their way through Navarro, they would all die in this basement. Mateo looked up. Directly above Navarro and his men was the nightclub's high-voltage primary electrical junction box. Mateo didn't shoot at the agents. He frantically swung his submachine gun upward, aimed at the dense cluster of heavy power cables feeding the box, and emptied his final magazine into the metal grid. Sparks erupted in a blinding shower of blue and white electricity. A deafening, explosive crack echoed through the basement. Every single light in the underground corridor died. The emergency backup system failed. The basement was instantly plunged into suffocating darkness. Navarro ordered his men to hold fire, momentarily blinded by the explosive flash. It bought Mateo precisely 3 seconds. Mateo grabbed Marco by the collar, dragging him blind through the pitch-black corridor toward the rusted maintenance doors leading to the adjacent laundromat. June swiftly provided cover in the darkness, kicking open the heavy doors and guiding them out into the freezing, rain-soaked alleyway. They scrambled into a heavily dented gray sedan waiting in the alley. The Askel's driver slammed the gas, peeling out onto the chaotic streets just as the NBI operators broke through the maintenance doors with heavy flashlights. Mateo slumped hard against the back seat of the sedan, his heart slamming against his ribs. He looked out the rain-streaked window. Behind them, the Novus Club, the shining crown jewel of Marco's immense empire, was surrounded by flashing red and blue police lights. The NBI was dragging uncooperative senators, billionaires, and triad associates out in heavy plastic handcuffs. Mateo looked over at Marco. The Mad King was shaking uncontrollably, his head buried tightly between his knees, unable to grasp the catastrophic collapse of everything they had built. The empire was gone. Now, it was just about survival.